the beginning of the Nazi Party. In the years following Germany's defeat in World War I, the country was in chaos. The once mighty German Empire had crumbled, and in its place stood the Weimar Republic, a fragile democratic government struggling to unite a broken nation. Amid this turmoil, Adolf Hitler, a young and almost unknown Austrian, began his rise to power. When Hitler returned to Munich in late 1918, the city was barely recognizable. Revolution had swept through Germany, and in Bavaria, the monarchy had fallen. The former royal family, the Wittelspocks, was gone, and the region was now under the control of the Social Democrats. On November 7, 1918, a writer and politician, Kurt Eisner, led a peaceful revolution. With just a few hundred supporters, he stormed the Bavarian parliament, deposed the old government, and declared a new republic. Munich was now a hotbed of political change, and Eisner, a Jewish writer with a distinctive grey beard, pince-nez glasses, and a large black hat, became a symbol of this upheaval. However, Eisner's rule was short-lived. 3 months later, he was assassinated by a young right-wing officer named Count Anton Drexler. In response, the workers in Munich set up their own Soviet-style government, but it didn't last long. By May 1, 1919, military forces from Berlin and right-wing volunteer militias, known as the Freikorps, marched into Munich and crushed the communist regime. Hundreds of people, including non-communists, were killed in the fighting, and Munich fell under the control of more conservative and nationalist forces. In the wake of this violence, the political power in Munich shifted dramatically to the right. The Bavarian government was now dominated by monarchists, military leaders, and disgruntled former soldiers, men who felt betrayed by the defeat in the war and the democratic government that followed. These were individuals who despised the Weimar Republic and sought to return to a more authoritarian and militaristic system. Many of these men, particularly the soldiers, were angry and disillusioned, having lost everything they had fought for in the war. They were often violent and looking for a cause to rally behind, a cause that could give meaning to their lost lives. In Munich, one such man, Adolf Hitler, was also finding his way. Having served as a soldier during the war, he returned to Munich after the defeat. The city, like the rest of Germany, was filled with the wounded and the broken, and Hitler was no different. He was without friends, money, or a clear direction in life. His prospects seemed bleak, and for a moment, he himself recognized how little he had to offer the world. However, something began to change within him. As he watched the chaos unfolding around him, Hitler realized that he had the potential to shape Germany's future. He found a way into the political scene through the military. The German army, now deeply involved in politics, assigned him to a press bureau where he could engage with political ideas. It was here that Hitler's oratorical abilities began to surface. His speeches, filled with passion and anger, captivated those around him. It was a moment of self-discovery for Hitler, as he realized that he had a gift for speaking that could set him apart from others. In 1919, Hitler's military superiors sent him to investigate a small political group in Munich called the German Workers' Party, DAP. This party, though small and unremarkable, would soon become the foundation for the Nazi Party. Initially, Hitler wasn't impressed by what he saw. The DAP met in a dark, uninviting room with only a handful of members. The party seemed like one of many fringe organizations springing up in the wake of the war. But after hearing a speech by a man named Gottfried Feder, an economist obsessed with the idea of breaking interest slavery, Hitler began to see the potential for something bigger. Feder's ideas resonated with him, particularly the idea of attacking the speculative capital that Hitler believed had played a part in Germany's economic problems. As Hitler sat through the meeting, he became increasingly irritated by a professor, who suggested that Bavaria should break away from the rest of Germany and unite with Austria. Hitler, who had a deep attachment to German unity, erupted in anger. He spoke passionately against the idea, and his speech was so forceful that the professor left the room in defeat. This moment marked the beginning of Hitler's public political career. After the meeting, a man named Anton Drexler, the founder of the German Workers' Party, approached Hitler. Drexler was a locksmith by trade, and though he lacked formal education, he had a vision for a new political movement. He saw something in Hitler that he believed could lead the party to greater heights. Drexler, with his ideas and Hitler's speaking ability, began to work together to shape what would eventually become the Nazi Party. In the early days of the party, the German Workers' Party was still small and struggling, but Hitler's involvement gave it the energy and direction it had been lacking. With his charismatic speeches and growing following, Hitler began to turn the party into a force to be reckoned with in Munich. Over time, the party would evolve, taking on more radical positions, and as Hitler's influence grew, so too did the party's power. The birth of the Nazi Party wasn't just a moment in history. It was the beginning of a journey that would change the world forever. In the years that followed, Hitler would use his talents as an orator, his knowledge of the suffering of the German people, and the broken promises of the Weimar Republic to build a movement that would eventually lead him to the chancellorship, and ultimately to the dark days of the Second World War. The path of the Nazi Party was a turbulent one, filled with violence, betrayal, and manipulation. But it all started in the chaotic aftermath of World War I, in a broken Germany searching for answers, and a disillusioned man who would stop at nothing to reshape his country in his image. In 1919, Adolf Hitler officially became the 7th member of the German Workers' Party, a small, relatively insignificant group with big ambitions. Among its early members were two key figures who would later play pivotal roles in Hitler's rise to power. The first was Captain Ernst Röhm, a stocky, hard-edged professional soldier who had joined the party before Hitler. Röhm was a man with a deep hatred for the democratic Weimar Republic and the so-called November criminals he blamed for Germany's defeat in World War I. He shared Hitler's vision of a strong nationalist Germany, believing that it could only be realized by a party that appealed to the working class, a class to which he himself belonged, unlike many officers in the regular army. Röhm was tough, ruthless, and the natural organizer. He helped form the early Nazi paramilitary units, which would evolve into the infamous SA Sturm of Teilung, the Stormtroopers. Röhm's connections within the military and his ability to mobilize ex-soldiers and veterans were invaluable to Hitler. Without the protection and occasional support of the Bavarian military, Hitler's radical movements might never have gained a foothold. The second influential figure was Dietrich Eckart, a journalist and would-be poet who is often called the spiritual founder of National Socialism. Though Eckart's poetry and plays were largely forgotten, he was instrumental in shaping Hitler's ideological development. A hard-drinking, eccentric man with a flair for oratory, Eckart introduced Hitler to key figures in Munich's intellectual and business circles, as well as to future Nazi leaders like Rudolf Hess and Alfred Rosenberg. Eckart became a close advisor to Hitler, helping him refine his German language skills and his political message. Despite his personal flaws, Hitler admired him deeply, and in Mein Kampf, he expressed his gratitude, recognizing Eckart's dedication to awakening the German people. These early men, Röhm's military connections, Eckart's intellectual guidance, and the vision of Hitler himself were instrumental in transforming what had begun as a fringe political group into the Nazi Party. Hitler's leadership emerged as the defining force, and his ideas began to take form. Hitler's early efforts to grow the party were met with little success. In the beginning, the meetings were small, often poorly attended. but Hitler's determination was unshakable. He began distributing handbills and even paid for advertisements in local newspapers to promote the party's gatherings. His first major public speech, delivered in the Hofbrauhaus in February 1920, marked a turning point. Despite initial disruptions from left-wing opponents, Hitler's powerful oratory gradually won over the crowd. By the end of the speech, the audience was captivated, and donations poured in to support the fledgling movement. The event was so significant that Hitler later wrote about it in Mein Kampf, calling it the moment when the party first began to exert real influence on public opinion. The speech also marked the first time Hitler publicly presented the 25-point program of the German Workers' Party, a hodgepodge of nationalist and anti-Semitic ideas that would later define Nazi ideology. Although many of these points were impractical or quickly forgotten as the party grew, some were ominously prescient, particularly the calls for the expansion of German territory, the removal of Jews from German society, and the rejection of the Treaty of Versailles. One of the most important points in the program was the demand for the unification of all Germans into a Greater Germany, a goal Hitler would pursue when he annexed Austria and later demanded the return of German-speaking territories like the Sudetenland. Another critical point called for the abrogation of the Versailles Treaty, which had imposed harsh penalties on Germany after World War I. These ideas, seemingly radical at the time, would become the bedrock of Hitler's expansionist policies, leading directly to the outbreak of World War II. However, not all of the program's points were rooted in Nazi ideology. Some were simply populist appeals to the working class, such as calls for the nationalization of large industries and the abolition of income from unearned wealth. These points, championed by party members like Drexler and Feder, were more aligned with socialist ideals, but would be ignored once Hitler secured support from industrialists and large landowners. Despite this, the more nationalistic and anti-Semitic elements of the program would become central to Nazi policies in the years to come. By the spring of 1920, the party had officially changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, and Hitler's leadership was firmly established. His ability to command attention with his speeches, organize events, and inspire fervor was unmatched, and his movement began to grow beyond its humble origins as a small, fringe group. As Hitler's power within the party grew, so did his ambitions. By the time he became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, the ideas he had outlined in 1920 would be implemented with disastrous consequences, not only for Germany, but for the entire world. The Nazi Party, founded by a collection of misfits and dreamers, would become the most powerful political force in Germany, leading the nation and much of Europe into a period of unprecedented violence, destruction, and loss.